This horror story follows a young man named Peter, a university student who has just moved into an apartment complex near his school. The apartment he rented was quite cheap since it was old and had been unoccupied for a long time, leaving a strong, musty smell. Peter had to purchase almost all the basic furniture and household items himself. On his first day moving in, he was exhausted. After cleaning until nighttime, he turned on his computer to chat with friends. Peter told his friends about his new place, complaining that there was nothing fun around and that he didn't know anyone, making him feel very bored. So he decided to create his own fun. Wherever he went, he carried his binoculars. That was also his perverted hobby. He loved spying on people around him, curious about what they were doing. Peter looked around. It was already dark and everything was silent. Even though he was in an apartment complex, he couldn't even hear the sounds of children. Looking down, he saw an eerily empty scene. There was not a single person outside. However, the apartment building across from his seemed to have quite a few residents. Since Peter was already used to spying, he turned off all the lights in his room, allowing him to observe without being noticed. Across from him, he saw a family sitting together watching TV. In another apartment, a young man was lifting weights. To the right, there was a girl studying at her desk. She looked quite stressed, probably overwhelmed by her schoolwork. As he moved his binoculars to another apartment, Peter saw a young woman. It looked like she was changing clothes. Peter felt excited. This was exactly the kind of scene he wanted to see the most. Since he was high up, some women might walk around their homes freely without any clothes on, creating an opportunity for perverts like Peter to get what they wanted. Just as he was watching intently, the lights in the girl's room suddenly went out. Peter thought to himself that sooner or later he would see her face. Surely she must be very beautiful. At least now he knew that a beautiful girl lived across from him, meaning he wouldn't be bored anymore. Peter called his friend to brag about the pretty girl across the way, saying that tonight he would definitely get a glimpse of her face. Every now and then, Peter would stand up, grab his binoculars, and watch the apartments across from him. But there was something strange. The family of three was still sitting and watching TV, even though their lights had been turned off. The man next door was still lifting weights. Since these people were sitting by the window, Peter could see them clearly. Even the schoolgirl was still sitting at her desk studying, despite her room being dark. Peter could see them thanks to the moonlight. However, when he looked at the young woman's apartment, he saw her standing in front of a mirror. But something was odd. Peter had been watching for over 15 minutes, yet she hadn't moved at all. Suddenly, the girl tilted her head slightly, making Peter think he had almost been caught, but he quickly dismissed the thought. There was no way they could see him from their side, right? Relieved, Peter let out a breath and continued looking into the girl's room with his binoculars. It was truly strange. She remained completely still, making Peter feel uneasy. Suddenly, the other apartments lit up, drawing Peter's attention. But oddly enough, the people inside were still in the exact same positions. The family of three still watching TV. The young man was still lifting weights, repeating the exact same motion. But how could he have such endless stamina? The schoolgirl was also still sitting at her desk. Peter brushed it off as a coincidence and returned to his computer to continue chatting with his friends. Peter had no idea that a terrifying pair of eyes had already noticed his presence. He kept chatting with his friends until midnight. Since he wasn't used to the new place, he didn't feel sleepy at all. Suddenly, the lights in the apartment complex across from him went out, catching his attention. Peter glanced over and sensed that something was off. Even from a distance, he could feel that someone was standing by the window across from him. a feint. His curiosity got the better of him, so he quickly grabbed his binoculars and looked across. The atmosphere was eerily silent. The wind was picking up and the air had turned cold. Peter saw a vague, dark figure standing completely still in the girl's apartment. He tried to adjust the focus to see more clearly, since all the apartments across from him were now completely dark. Suddenly, Peter jolted in horror. A terrifying face appeared. It grinned from ear to ear and let out a bone-chilling scream. Overwhelmed with fear, Peter screamed out loud. He stumbled backward and fell, realizing that he had just seen a ghost. His throat went dry, and his entire body turned ice cold. He couldn't believe it. Was what he had just seen really a ghost? But why did it feel so real? Gathering all his courage, Peter lifted his binoculars again, thinking he might have just imagined it. However, the next sight made his blood run cold. The schoolgirl was staring directly at him with hollow, dark eyes. Even the man lifting weights had a grotesque, distorted face. The family of 3 was no exception. They were all standing by their window, staring straight at Peter. At that moment, Peter felt his limbs freeze. He couldn't move. He was facing an entire apartment complex filled with... Suddenly, countless eyes appeared on the wall behind him. Peter was terrified. He never imagined that his perverted hobby would one day lead him to witness something this horrifying. He looked into the young woman's apartment one more time, but there was no one there anymore. All he could see was the mirror. Something compelled him to question why the mirror was placed there, so he zoomed in closer. Peter felt his soul leave his body. The mirror had been positioned to reflect his own apartment, but even worse, in the reflection, he saw a woman in white standing right behind him. A chill ran down his spine. Panicked, Peter turned around. It was her, the ghostly woman. Behind her, dozens of eerie eyes stared at him. The entire room was now covered in terrifying, watching eyes. The woman spoke. She told him that from the moment he entered this place, they had all been watching him. The lights in Peter's apartment suddenly went out, followed by his blood-curdling scream. This terrifying story is about a member of Organization X, which specializes in kidnapping delinquent youths for a horrifying experiment called monster hybridization. That night, in a deserted park, a young woman was assaulted by a man. The poor girl had her mouth covered by the man as he pinned her down. She could only struggle in desperation. He had been following her for several days. She worked at a bar and often went home late. Then he smirked slyly and began his vile act. Suddenly, he jerked in shock. Someone had attacked him from behind. The man foamed at the mouth and collapsed on the spot. A mysterious man wearing a hat had arrived just in time to rescue the girl. In his hand, he held a stun baton. It seemed to be a tool specifically for suppression and self-defense. The terrified girl quickly calmed down when she heard a voice telling her to go home. She had no idea what was happening. She only knew she was now safe thanks to this man. Standing up, she quickly ran away, leaving the unconscious attacker and the mysterious man behind. She didn't forget to report the incident, and soon the police arrived at the scene. However, by then, there was no trace left, making the officer annoyed, thinking it was a false report. Now, let's move on to another development in the story, taking place at a 24-hour supermarket in the city. A blind old woman had come to the store to buy some groceries, instructing her guide dog to wait outside. This intelligent dog understood all of her commands. It obediently sat outside, waiting for its owner. Suddenly, a suspicious-looking car approached from a distance. Inside the vehicle were several tools for catching dogs. It turned out these men were dog thieves. The man in the white shirt commented on how plump the dog looked. He then grabbed a dog-catching pole and approached the golden retriever. In an instant, the noose tightened around the dog's neck. Inside the store, the old woman heard her dog barking frantically. Sensing danger, she rushed outside. The dog was being dragged away, and another man used a baseball bat to knock it unconscious. They quickly loaded the dog into the car and sped off. The old woman panicked, still unaware of what had happened to her dog. By the time she cried out, the car had already vanished with her beloved pet. Meanwhile, on the road, a large truck was speeding down the nearly empty late-night streets. The driver, feeling at ease, carelessly lit a cigarette. He continued smoking while driving. In an instant, he jolted in shock and slammed on the brakes. But it was too late. In a secret warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a TV broadcasted breaking news about a severe accident that left 2 dead and 3 injured. After hitting a blind old woman, the truck swerved and struck 3 more people, killing them instantly. The driver also died on the way to the hospital. In a corner of the warehouse, the young man from earlier had been captured and brutally beaten. However, he still didn't understand why he had been brought to this place. Overwhelmed with fear, he suddenly heard footsteps approaching. The door slowly creaked open. He gasped in horror as he saw the man stepping inside. The man removed the cloth gagging the young man's mouth. Even more terrifying, the man was holding an axe. The young man was now utterly petrified, realizing the worst was about to happen. The man smirked and told him that he had to pay for his sins. However, his death would not be in vain. Too terrified to scream, the young man could only tremble as the bespectacled man swung the axe down. After killing him and chopping him into pieces, the flesh was ground in a meat grinder. His clothes and belongings were burned in a metal barrel. Strangely enough, the bespectacled man was performing some kind of surgical procedure. Inside the warehouse, the ground-up flesh of the young man became a lavish meal for the bespectacled man's dog. In the following days, more mysterious disappearances occurred, and the police finally found clues leading to a suspect. Surveillance cameras helped the authorities identify their prime target. Soon after, the police gathered more critical evidence. Now let's return to the 3 dog thieves at their hideout. They captured both dogs and cats. Some were sold to slaughterhouses, while others were held for ransom. The poor guide dog was locked in a corner, looking exhausted from starvation. Once the accident was no longer in the news, the thieves prepared to sell the dog. This time, they had a wealthy family willing to pay a high price for such an intelligent dog. The man in the blue shirt stood outside, urging them to hurry. Inside, the poor dog was too weak to resist and was easily subdued. The 2 men discussed how, after selling this dog, they would catch more, since their stock was running low. Little did they know, a man stood outside with a black dog, waiting. It was the mysterious man, seemingly planning to capture these criminals, to punish them and use them for his experiments. As the thieves loaded the caged dogs onto the truck, they carefully stacked the crates. Just then, the man in the white shirt noticed a strange dog in front of him. The dog stared at him without fear, thinking it could be easily lured. The thief pulled out a sausage. The man in blue seemed to understand and prepared a rope to capture it. They assumed the dog would eagerly take the food, however it showed no interest. Suddenly it lunged and bit the man's hand. Growling fiercely, it tore into his flesh while he screamed in pain. The dog was so strong and aggressive that the man in blue was too scared to hold it back. The man in white desperately pulled his arm away, but the scent of blood only made the dog more frenzied. In a panic, the man in white pulled out a knife. He intended to stab the rabid dog, but before he could, a brick flew from a distance. It struck him hard, catching him off guard. It was the bespectacled man. One clean hit knocked the man in white out cold. The man in blue was so frightened that he dropped the rope. He stammered, begging for mercy, but the bespectacled man only smiled gently. Just then, hearing the commotion outside, the last thief stepped out, annoyed. However, when he arrived, there was no one in sight. He started looking around in confusion. As he was walking, he bumped into a man wearing glasses. He was about to threaten the person who had collided with him when suddenly he was hit with a devastating punch to the face. That night, at the man's secret warehouse, the 3 young men were dismembered one by one for experimentation. After finishing off the man in the white shirt, the man wearing glasses moved on to the next victim. Before killing them, he made sure to tell them they must pay for the crimes they had committed, and he emphasized that they would be reborn once again. Meanwhile, the police had discovered the killer's secret location and were rushing to the scene. However, by this time, the second young man had already been ground to a pulp. Inside the warehouse, only one young man with a buzz cut remained. He groggily regained consciousness. His head throbbed in pain like it was being split open, but he sighed in relief, realizing he was still alive. However, he couldn't understand why he hadn't been tied up. In the darkness, he fumbled around, trying to find a way to escape, but suddenly he felt himself bump into something soft. Horror struck him as he realized it was the severed head of his friend. Panicking, he desperately searched for a way to escape. Outside, the police had arrived and surrounded the area. The person who reported the crime mentioned hearing many screams from inside. The police remained extremely cautious, with the officer in charge instructing his subordinates to be wary in case the suspect was armed. Following orders, the officers lay in wait outside, ready for action. Inside, an eerie silence filled the air. Even the dogs locked in their cages had stopped barking. The warehouse was completely surrounded by the police force. When the police broke down the door and stormed inside, they found no one. The officer thought to himself the suspect must have escaped in time. There were still traces of fire at the scene. The dogs belonging to the 3 young men were still there. The officer felt a tinge of disappointment, knowing he had arrived too late. However, while searching the building, the officer discovered 2 additional rooms. Feeling a surge of anticipation, he carefully checked each one. The officers felt suffocated by the stench of blood permeating the place. Blood was splattered all over the warehouse and tools used for body disposal were scattered everywhere. Suddenly, they discovered yet another room. Inside, they found the young man with the buzz cut still alive. 2 officers quickly questioned him about the others and the identity of the killer. However, he was the sole survivor. He was visibly shaken, pleading for help, his mind overwhelmed with fear. He lunged at the officer and cried out, "The man with glasses! He's a deranged killer!" Suddenly, the officer noticed something horrifying. He raised his gun and aimed forward. From within the room, a grotesque figure crawled out. Even more terrifying, it was a patchwork of human body parts. The creature was assembled from the remains of 3 or 4 different men. Heads were grotesquely stitched onto its abdomen, while various pieces of flesh were crudely sewn together. For the first time in his life, the officer witnessed something so utterly monstrous. The buzz-cut young man, trembling with fear, stammered, "That man, he's a madman. He kills people, dismembers them, and then stitches them back together." But just then, the officer's face turned pale with horror. He had realized something even more terrifying. 3 human heads had emerged from the back of the buzz-cut young man. 2 of them belonged to his own friends. Even the most seasoned officers, hardened by years in the field, recoiled in fear and fled at the sight of this nightmare. The experiments conducted on these people were beyond horrifying. From a distance, the man with glasses grinned menacingly. I am an artist. I have imagined many fascinating stories and turned them into comics. From children's stories to ones meant for adults, nothing is too difficult for me. However, just last week, I encountered something truly terrifying, and I think I should share it with you now, in the form of a visual story. It all began last Thursday when my mother received a call from a friend. He wanted me to watch over his house for 3 days. So my mother packed my suitcase carefully. I had helped Uncle John with this kind of favor before. Curious, I asked my mother why it seemed urgent. She told me that this time he was going back to his hometown to handle paperwork for selling land to pay off debts. She also warned me to be careful around his son, as he was a gambler and not a good person. Uncle John's house was more than 20 kilometers away from mine. Since I had a lot of free time lately, I considered this trip a short getaway. From what I remembered, Uncle John was not the most pleasant person. He was strict, reserved, and spoke very little. As I stepped inside, I called out to him. The house smelled of fresh paint, as if it had recently been renovated. Glancing around, I saw a few bags of cement and paint buckets, confirming my suspicion. But something felt odd. Most of the paint was unused, as if the renovation was unfinished. Why had Uncle John left for his hometown in such a hurry? Just as I was deep in thought, the door creaked open. Seeing Uncle John, I immediately greeted him. True to his cold nature, he said nothing and simply gestured for me to follow him. As I walked inside, I caught a strange smell. It mixed with the fresh paint and cement, but there was also a faint, foul stench. The house was clean, but it gave me an unsettling feeling. The structure followed an old-fashioned design, making everything seem stiff and rigid. As I followed Uncle John inside, I noticed something odd. It was lunchtime, yet neither his wife nor his son was anywhere in sight. The dining table still had untouched food and 3 bowls set on it. Without a word, Uncle John led me upstairs to the room where I would be staying for 3 days. The house had a strange layout. To reach any room, you had to pass through the main living area and the kitchen. He brought me to my room and told me to stay there, assuring me that I could call him if I needed anything. After that brief instruction, he left immediately. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He didn't seem welcoming at all. Later, I would realize that, at that very moment, Uncle John's wife had been standing outside, staring up at my window. She didn't move, just stood there, watching. I should have noticed something was wrong. That night, I struggled to sleep in the unfamiliar place. Uncle John was set to leave early in the morning, and the next 3 days would feel incredibly long. I tried to push my thoughts aside, but I couldn't ignore how strangely Uncle John and his wife were acting. Just as I was about to drift off, I heard footsteps outside. I assumed they were getting up early to prepare for their trip, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was going on. What truly caught my attention was a noise coming from the yard. I sat still for a moment, then gathered my courage to check what was happening. I walked over to the window and peered outside, putting on my glasses for a clearer view. Strangely, Uncle John's wife was standing in the yard. It was dark, so I couldn't see clearly, but she was completely still. And what was even more unsettling, she was staring directly at my window. I felt uneasy. Why was she standing out there in the middle of the night? Suddenly, Uncle John appeared behind me, making me jump. He motioned for me to stay silent. At that moment, I heard a motorcycle approaching. It came to a stop, and a young man got off. He entered the house. I assumed it was Uncle John's son returning late from a night out. But something was strange. Uncle John remained quiet, keeping his eyes fixed on the second floor, his son's room. Why was he so tense? Why had he asked me to stay silent? The sound of his son's footsteps echoed through the quiet house, sending chills down my spine. I remained motionless, listening as the footsteps descended the stairs. Uncle John and I both held our breath, fearing that he might open our door. But he walked past and went straight into the yard. Instinctively, I turned toward the window. He was indeed outside, but I couldn't tell what he was doing. Suddenly he turned his head and looked directly at me. But of course, he couldn't see anything. Uncle John and I had already ducked down, hiding from view, but I still didn't understand. Why was Uncle John so wary of his own son? Outside, the motorcycle roared to life. His son had left. Uncle John finally placed a hand on my shoulder and told me that everything depended on me now. He warned me to stay away from his son, to escape and never let him catch me. His serious tone sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly I jolted awake. Something had just dripped onto my face. It was just a dream. But why had it felt so real? In the dream, Uncle John had warned me about his son and the ceiling. I clearly remembered his pale face and the fear in his eyes. Half asleep, I felt another drop land on my face. I touched it and realized it smelled horrible. It was thick and slimy. I inspected it closely. A putrid stench overwhelmed me. It smelled like something dead. Then, to my horror, a strange shape began to emerge on the ceiling. More of the foul liquid dripped down. I held my breath against the unbearable stench. I had to check upstairs. Perhaps a leak had sprung from the ongoing renovations. As I cracked the door open, the stench hit me like a wave, making me nearly vomit. Just as I suspected, the area had been recently renovated, but it was still messy. Then, as I connected the pieces, I felt a chill run down my spine. Something terrible had happened here. I bolted out of the house immediately. I called the police. There was something horrifying hidden in that place. When they arrived and searched the scene, they found a decomposing body beneath the floor. It was Uncle John. In the backyard, they dug up another corpse. His wife. The murderer had finally been caught. It was none other than Uncle John's son. He had been a gambling addict, stealing money from home for years. Uncle John had paid his debts multiple times. The night before I arrived, they had argued. His son had demanded he sell the family land to cover his debt. Uncle John refused as it was ancestral land, sacred to their lineage. In a fit of rage, his son had stabbed him and his mother to death. After killing them, he covered up his crime, cleaning the blood, repainting the walls, and hiding Uncle John's body beneath the floor with cement, while burying his mother in the backyard. Justice was served and he faced the consequences. He now lived in deep regret. His gambling addiction had cost him everything. I had lived through this nightmare. I believe Uncle John called me there to uncover the truth. Whether it was a dream or a coincidence, I now know. Ghosts do exist. This terrifying story took place at a high school in the city, where strange incidents were occurring more and more frequently. The entire school was buzzing about a mysterious pill that had surfaced. When taken, it allowed students to stay awake for 3 to 4 days straight without feeling tired. Since its origins were unknown, the pill was banned from being sold openly, forcing students to trade it in secret. Even its usage had to be kept under wraps. Anyone caught taking it would be disciplined by the school. One day, Lily discovered the identity of a seller and secretly made contact, determined to get her hands on the pill. With an overwhelming school workload and preparations for various activities, Lily brought the pills home and invited her friend to try them together. She convinced Anna that pooling their money would make it cheaper. Plus, Anna was in the middle of binge-watching some TV series, so she would be staying up for the next few nights anyway. However, Anna believed that staying up late was already bad for health, let alone staying awake for 3 or 4 days straight. The pill seemed too dangerous. Ignoring her friend's warnings, Lily remained firm in her decision. That night, Anna went to bed early, reminding Lily to be careful since the pill's effects were unverified and could have dangerous side effects. Lily laughed it off, claiming the pill not only kept her awake but also helped regulate her menstrual cycle. She had done her research on the school forums. Since Lily wouldn't listen, Anna gave up trying to convince her. Before going to sleep, she reminded Lily to stay quiet if she planned on staying up. That night, Lily started watching her favorite TV show, confident she could finish her homework right before dawn. Time passed quickly. She alternated between chatting with her boyfriend and binge-watching. The pills rarely worked. Lily stayed awake for 3 nights straight, finishing tons of assignments and completing 2 full TV series. However, things didn't go as smoothly as she had hoped. By the 5th day, she suddenly felt exhausted. Anna pointed out that no pill could defy nature. Staying awake for days would inevitably take a toll on the body. What Lily feared most had begun. Her face broke out in pimples, and they were spreading fast. Anna explained that sleep deprivation often caused acne, and that Lily had wasted her money on a worthless pill. Ignoring her friend, Lily opened her drawer, grabbed a blackhead remover, and prepared to deal with the pimples. She had struggled with acne before, but thanks to proper skincare, her complexion had recently improved. Yet now she found herself battling breakouts again. Still, she convinced herself that it was just her body's natural reaction and not a side effect of the pills. As she started squeezing her pimples, something strange happened. Just seconds ago, they had been tiny, but suddenly they multiplied and grew larger. When she popped one, it turned out to be abnormally big, shocking her. The massive blackhead left behind a grotesque hole on her face. She flicked the extracted pimple onto her palm. This was the largest blackhead she had ever removed. Suddenly, she realized something horrifying. The pimple was identical in size and shape to the pills she had been taking. A chill ran down her spine. Anna joked that maybe Lily had been consuming the extracted blackheads of other students. Lily froze, growing more uneasy the more she thought about it, but she quickly dismissed it as a baseless joke from Anna. Then, without warning, the pimples on her face started falling off on their own, even though she hadn't touched them. They were growing rapidly and in overwhelming numbers. Panicked, Lily rushed to a mirror. This was the first time she had ever experienced something like this. If she went outside looking like this, she would die of embarrassment. Her face had become horrifyingly disfigured, covered in red, inflamed craters left behind by the falling pimples. Desperate, she turned to Anna for help. She had a school performance today. There was no way she could appear in public looking like this. Lily was both terrified and regretful, begging Anna for a solution, but her friend had no idea what to do. She finally admitted that she should have listened to Anna from the start. Now, she was certain that the pills had caused her condition. Anna was at a loss. No amount of makeup could hide Lily's monstrous face. Suddenly, Lily had an idea. Plastic surgery was the only way to fix this. But where would she get the money? Her eyes fell on the fallen pimples. That's it! They looked exactly like the pills she had bought. She could sell them. Soon, Lily joined the school's underground trading forum for the pills. She continued taking them, allowing her to collect more, and once she had a full bottle, she sold them for a hefty price. The pills quickly spread like wildfire throughout schools. Meanwhile, cosmetic clinics thrived as more students sought treatment. To this day, the mastermind behind the pills remains a mystery. This terrifying story is about a female dancer named Lena. Thanks to her beauty and talent, she appeared in many famous magazines, and her style was extremely seductive. She was also very skilled at using her looks to win over the big boss of the magazine publishing house. And of course, what he was really interested in was Lena's body. This time, the boss praised Lena's dancing and asked her to perform a horse dance with him that night. Just like that, Lena exceeded all expectations. She had a house, a car, and incredible fame. But Lena was an ambitious woman. She was never satisfied with what she had, and of course, no one knew that she was hiding a bizarre secret. Her beauty was actually the result of something strange she had bought from a mysterious website run by Organization X. It was a cosmetic facial mask. Once applied, it would make her skin incredibly beautiful, but she could only use one piece per day. Every morning when she woke up, Lena would apply a mask, and her flawless skin would last for 24 hours. Whenever she ran out, she simply called the hotline, and someone from Organization X would deliver more. Thanks to this, Lena had maintained her desired beauty for the past month. However, she was completely unaware that there was one strict rule about the mask. It could not be used with makeup. That day, Lena had an important meeting with a well-known tycoon. Wanting to look even more stunning, she asked a makeup artist at a restaurant to do her makeup. When the makeup artist saw Lena's face, she was shocked. Lena was already incredibly beautiful. Why would she need makeup? However, Lena insisted on having her eyeliner darkened and her features sharpened to match the tycoon's preferences. The makeup artist complied, thinking, well, they're paying me, so I'll do it. After the makeup session, Lena was very satisfied. A beautiful woman always wants to be even more beautiful. She felt that her face was now perfect. In fact, she thought that if she saw a single pimple, she might go crazy. Just as she was thinking this, she glanced at the makeup artist and suddenly became displeased. The woman had freckles on her face, and Lena found them extremely unpleasant to look at. Annoyed, Lena snapped at the makeup artist, calling her ugly and questioning how someone in her profession could allow her face to look like that. The makeup artist could only cry in response. She already felt insecure about being a makeup artist with bad skin. That night, Lena attended a party with the billionaire. From being a dancer, she had now moved on to a more prestigious profession, horse dancing. She decided she would become the billionaire's sugar baby. The next morning, Lena stayed at the restaurant because she still had work to do. Her manager called, informing her that she had a meeting with an important executive that evening and needed to prepare immediately. Lena quickly took out her cosmetic mask. However, as soon as she opened it, something felt off. This time, her skin didn't change at all. The rough texture and blemishes remained. Suddenly, she remembered what had happened the day before. The makeup artist had applied light makeup to her face. Panic sets in. If that was the reason the mask no longer worked, she was doomed. Her career and wealth would vanish, along with her beauty. Thinking of this, she grabbed the box of masks to check the instructions. But strangely, there were no instructions or warnings on the packaging. Desperate, Lena decided to use another mask, ignoring the warning that she could only use one per day. She had no other choice. If she went to the meeting looking like this, she would scare the executive away. Gritting her teeth, she took a gamble. She quickly applied the second mask. Meanwhile, her manager, noticing Lena hadn't come upstairs for the party, went down to look for her. Seeing the makeup artist, the manager asked where Lena was. The makeup artist smirked and said Lena was in the bathroom. Strangely, the freckles on her face had vanished. Growing impatient, the manager urged Lena to hurry up, reminding her of the crucial advertising contract they needed to sign. Wanting to ensure the mask worked, Lena left it on longer than usual and asked her manager to give her a few more minutes. This contract was critical. Her beauty would determine everything. Holding her breath, Lena waited and prayed. Then she finally removed the mask. However, this time it wouldn't come off. It was stuck to her skin. Her manager impatiently knocked on the door, urging her to hurry. Lena struggled to peel the mask off, but was too afraid to open her eyes and look in the mirror. When she finally dared to look, she let out a sigh of relief. Her beauty was still intact. Thanks to her appearance, Lena successfully signed a contract with the city's most prestigious modeling agency. The director was highly impressed by her looks, though he hinted that if she gave him some special attention, he would ensure her a great future in the company. Lena understood his implication all too well. She signaled back that she was willing to do whatever it took. As long as she could become a famous model, appear in major TV ads, she would agree to anything. Just then, the director's expression turned uneasy, as if he had seen something disturbing. Something bizarre was happening. Red blemishes started appearing on Lena's face. The director, unable to believe his eyes, stepped closer. Looking carefully, his face twisted in horror. The blemishes multiplied rapidly, covering her face in a grotesque pattern. Terrified, the director staggered backward, unable to comprehend how her face had become so hideous. Her manager also saw it and was utterly horrified. She even screamed in disgust. Still clueless about what was happening, Lena innocently asked, "What's wrong?" Meanwhile, her face was now covered in dozens of grotesque, festering boils.